changing the definition of collateral. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a worldwide crisis of immense proportions. Globally, we are facing a threat from a virus which is yet to be understood. There has been a huge impact of the pandemic on lives. Businesses have shut their doors, downsized, leaving many persons out of a job. This has created the need for businesses to diversify their operations to new areas in order to survive this economic slump. The Secured Transactions Reform Project was conceptualized in order to create the enabling environment to increase credit for micro, small, and medium enterprises. This new framework will allow the use of movable assets by firms to access financing to start new businesses or expand their existing operations. The legislation will enable both borrowers and lenders to recognize movable assets as collateral, thereby supporting credit financing with movable assets.
So what currently obtains right now is our banks typically accept collateral in the form of real property or immovable property such as land and house. And even before we commenced the implementation of this reform project, we conducted extensive research and analysis on the private sector in St. Lucia. And the data and the research basically reveals that the average small and micro business owner does not have access or does not own collateral in the form of land and building. And so because of this, it makes it increasingly problematic for them to be able to qualify for business loans from our local banks. And so what this project seeks to do is to expand the range of assets which can be used as collateral to include movable assets such as livestock, accounts receivables, bank accounts, inventory, vehicles, industrial equipment, etc. And of course, the research revealed that these are in fact the categories and types of assets that an average young entrepreneur, small business owner, or even business startup would have access to or would own.
The security interest in movable assets legislation seeks to offer a solution to the lack of access to credit faced by the business sector.
Cash flow, funding, also persons with the skill sets that, takes to assist in moving you from where you are. But our biggest challenge is funding, especially when you do not have that capital, to move your business from where you are to the next level. So you basically depending just on the sales, the growth is small, it takes time.
It would be timely if we can enact this legislation at this time because we are in a recessionary period, and businesses in particular would need access to finance in order to maintain their operations, in order to improve their productivity, get to the level of economies of scale that they require. Because with shutdowns or scaling down of operations, you would appreciate that there is some efficiency loss. By having access to capital, you can keep your operations running at the same level of productive capacity, and not find yourself in a situation where you are actually spending more for the same dollar of output.
So this new legislative system will basically facilitate our small and micro business owners being able to qualify for loans within our local banks in order to obtain working capital or financing required for them to not only just survive but to also thrive.
The International Finance Corporation, IFC, World Bank Group, has provided technical assistance to St. Lucia in the implementation of this key reform, which is now at an advanced stage of implementation. Some of the work undertaken includes the drafting and review of the legislation, wide-ranging stakeholder consultations, and capacity-building exercises. The final draft is now before Cabinet for approval.
The whole process of consultation towards the formulation of this securities bill was one where we got an opportunity to make an input, which we are grateful for. It's been long in the making, but we've come to a very advanced stage. It is our opinion that this bill will revolutionize the financial services sector in St. Lucia, and certainly banking. We can now envisage a situation where people could literally use any kind of asset that is movable. So you look at machinery, equipment, even the goods in their warehouse in the case of small businesses, and use this as collateral for a loan. The existing mechanisms are a bit cumbersome and pricey to add, in that you need to consider stamp duties, you need to engage a lawyer. The securities bill for movable assets will allow you to do that now in a more seamless manner, in that you can have a direct arrangement with your bank or any lender for that matter, and register your security interests.
I think that this reform project is very timely as we continue to grapple with the effects of COVID-19. This pandemic has had an adverse impact not just on every sector of the economy, but also our private sector. We've had businesses which have had to close down, especially the micro businesses. Some have had to regroup and restructure their operations so as to remain afloat and to survive. And so this reform project will come in handy in helping them utilize their valuable movable assets in order to remain afloat.
And honestly, it's a good initiative. Knowing where you could use your equipment, raw materials, as collateral. You may not be able to get a big loan to do but at least it will help you moving from one step to the next. And I think we need more programs like that, to assist young, small, micro, entrepreneurs moving forward, because, like I said, funding is difficult. Whosoever came up with the thought, I must say it's a brilliant one.
But what are the benefits to the private sector? Countries around the world have experienced a positive impact from similar reform projects on their local businesses. In Ghana, for example, this reform has been particularly impactful on women-owned businesses, as they have been able to utilize valuable household assets as collateral. As a result, there has been an increase in newly established female-owned businesses or the expansion of their business operations.
We believe that this legislation is also about economic empowerment, because especially now with the pandemic and the economic fallout, people need to be able to have and utilize all resources at their disposal. And we cannot, exclude the movable assets that individuals have from this whole process, in that it could give them the opportunity to have access to finance. And that is very critical at this point in time, access to finance. Small businesses require that from a working capital perspective in order to keep their operations running. Households need access to finance in order to pursue projects that are meaningful to the household.
Governments are now moving towards the trend of utilizing movable assets as collateral to secure loan financing. These types of transactions are recorded and tracked within a collateral registry. A collateral registry is a database of notifications of movable assets which have been used to secure loan financing. The importance of a collateral registry cannot be overstated, particularly within the banking sector.
The beautiful thing about the legislation as well is that there will be a public register which is online. So it means that anyone can go in there and see where security interests lie, in that if later on the same individual seeks funding from another entity, that entity can go on the register and see whether or not there's any charge or security interest registered against that potential borrower.
In Albania, for example, the passing of the new Secured Transactions legislation and a collateral registry resulted in a 50% decrease in the risk associated with lending, and the interest rates on loans fell by 5%. A survey of companies of all sizes across 73 countries found that the introduction of collateral registries increased access to bank financing by 8% and access to loans by 7%, with a higher impact on smaller firms. The proposed legislation provides a comprehensive legal framework which will encourage local banks to accept movable asset-based lending to MSMEs to expand or grow their businesses. A key stakeholder in the drafting and review of this reform is the Legal Fraternity of St. Lucia, who weighed in on the merits of the intended legislation.
Certainly. I do think certainly that it is advantageous to small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. The Collateral Transactions Registry affords a wider scope of security, so to speak, than would otherwise have been available to these participants. From a lawyer's perspective or from a legal practitioner's perspective, I believe that lawyers can inform or advise members of the public, SMEs in particular, of the ambit of the Act, the scope of the Act. They can guide and sensitize customers of the registry, particularly corporate customers, secured creditors in fact, of the registration process and the particulars or the forms that are required to conduct this registration. I believe that the lawyers can also assist by performing any relevant searches of the registry database itself on behalf of interested persons, and may act as an agent for a secured creditor, for example. And they may execute the forms on behalf of the secured creditor. They may perform any relevant searches and, of course, execute what I would call subordinate agreements. So say, for example, you perform a search, you find that there is a charge on this movable property, but you figure there's sufficient value in there that you can take a subordinate role. And so you are essentially placed as a second secured creditor in that type of instance. And so lawyers do have a lot of scope and a lot of room within which to enable and to assist persons in this process.
Well, the good thing is that you could draft the terms of your agreement with your bank. Okay, so whatever terms and conditions that suit you, you will be able to draft that. Okay, once there is agreement by both parties and you have a signed document, that is essentially what would be registered. Okay, so there is a level of customization that will suit the needs of the specific borrower.
Some of the things that we would have seen in the past would be that it takes a tremendous amount of time, particularly from a creditor standpoint, to determine the status of a movable asset. Take a vehicle, for example, and whether or not that vehicle had any or previous existing loans on it. And so this process, by utilizing a database, so to speak, allows us to circumvent a lot of those issues and to have timely access to the information, which I think is critical.
The fundamental lesson the COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced is the need to prepare for the future with greater resilience and innovation while implementing projects and policies that increase St. Lucia's productivity and competitiveness. This can be achieved by building a strong private sector and diversifying our economy.
COVID showed us, hey, that we have to produce stuff in our country. We cannot be dependent on a third country all the time to be importing stuff. And we look at during the time of COVID, there's a lot of companies that, survive, they thrive through that time. And a lot more companies could do that, but they need help.
It is so important in terms of unlocking the economic potential that we have. And during these pandemic times, nothing is more important than making the maximum use of all resources at your disposal, and this is exactly what this piece of legislation will do. It will give us the opportunity to use all the resources that we have at our disposal to ensure that we maintain a good level of productive capacity.
From the context of any legal issues with the legislative provisions themselves, I think that we have largely been able to convince ourselves or to confirm for ourselves that the legislation is largely sound. There have been a few examples in other states and territories throughout the world, and so we did not see great degrees of challenge emanate from those nations. In fact, the results that came from them were fairly positive, and so the outlook is fairly good.
I think generally any reform project which tackles or provides solutions to the challenges and issues of the private sector is very important, and it not just augurs well for the private sector, but it has also a positive ripple domino effect in the wider economy, because we need to understand that the private sector is the driving force and the backbone of any economy.
The implementation of the Secured Transactions Project is an example of how government can unlock the private sector's potential. The introduction of this new legislative framework will better enable MSMEs to apply for credit in order to build resilience and introduce innovative products and services which will help them increase their productivity and collectively boost St. Lucia's level of competitiveness.